Hi, this is Ed in San Diego. In just a few minutes from Oxford University in England, we're going to talk with EISHA KAROL. She's founder, business English coach for global professionals. Her company is called Pronounce Me. Pronounce Me was incubated at the Said Business School in Oxford and is now a startup at Oxford University Innovation. EISHA has worked successfully with clients from France, Spain, Colombia, Poland, Italy, Turkey, Greece, Korea, India, and China. She also works as an affiliate trainer with Language Services Direct and Simon & Simon. Recent clients include companies such as BDO, AXAIM, Rabobank, Amundi Investment Management. PronounceMe.co.uk is about how to speak English well, clearly. Pronounce Me. And the founder and teacher, EISHA KAROL, will be with us in just a moment. We'll be back very quickly on Global TV Talk Show. Thank you. Okay, we're back. This is Ed in San Diego on Global TV Talk Show. This is program number 703 since we began the series in early March of 2020, the series developed because COVID pandemic literally crashed and burned our 30 years of doing live meetings. And so I had to figure out how to bring people together into what I call the global meeting room. And here we are on Zoom. And our very special guest today is coming with that music. You hear that? Our very special guest today is EISHA KAROL, and she's in Oxford University, Oxford, England. And welcome again.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be here again.
Yeah, thank you. So earlier you mentioned that it's late summer in England and the sun is out. So that's terrific. And I'm going to make this a brief encounter with you so you can run out and get some rays,
That's somewhere I can.
vitamin D. So your innovation in sync with Oxford University Innovation and your experience with Said Business School, that's world famous. And it has to do with the quality and the depth and the effectiveness of what goes on there. And your company, I'm going to ask you to do a better job than me talking about pronounceme.co.uk. Your specialty is helping professional, top global business people who are not speaking English as a first language connect globally and internally by learning how to, communicate clearer, better. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, what often happens is that professionals have a good qualification in English, and when they're hired, presumably the HR looks at the piece of paper and says, well, yes, this person is qualified and they can speak English. But because of the way the education system is, people generally don't receive much support in training with speaking a language. There's much more emphasis on writing and reading and understanding. So when global executives get promoted and then they have to manage a team which can be very international, or they have to present a lot to international clients, sometimes their speech isn't completely clear, it's not completely comprehensible, and or they don't feel 100% confident presenting in English. And sometimes they're not sure whether their team can fully understand them the first time round. All these things can really impact their confidence and ultimately their performance. And this problem isn't even talked about very much because it's not very politically correct to say that somebody's difficult to understand, especially, when they're a high flyer and they've got their ELTS or some qualification that says that they can speak English. And it's really just to do with the fact that English is so full of sounds that don't exist in other languages, and that we take for granted as native English speakers, you and I, Ed. But if you come from a language like Spanish that only has 5 vowel sounds that are intrinsic to Spanish, you're then thrown into a language like English that has 20 vowel sounds, of which 8 are diphthongs. And then a lot of them are spelt the same, but they don't rhyme because there are splits and mergers within the language. That's all very sort of historical stuff to do with the way that the language evolved and developed. But what I'm trying to say is that English is it's a whirlpool of irregularities for anybody coming from a different language background. And people are not getting very much help and support navigating their way through this until it becomes a problem. So this is where our programs step in to help get people over that hurdle so that they can speak English really clearly, feel confident about how they're speaking, and become really clear, confident presenters and good salespeople.
This is such a blessing to hear all of this so succinctly mentioned by you and explained by you. I am originally from Boston, Massachusetts, and relocated 3,000 miles as far away as I could get to Southern California, the Mexican border. And I just speak English and it just flows. I don't even think about it. And yet you talked and you identified the various sounds, and I don't even think about that. But others would, highly intelligent people, have no idea that they're going to encounter that unless they just watch Hollywood TV movies and TV shows and learn colloquial English, I guess.
Yeah, and that definitely helps. And what tends to happen then is that people get a lot of exposure to US English, probably Hollywood English. And then if they're confronted with another variant like British English or Australian English, it can sound like a completely different language to them because, the pronunciation is very different in British English. Our vowel sounds on our diphthongs tend to be a bit longer than they are in American English. And then we have different idioms, and there are certain things that British people will say that don't necessarily make sense if you've only been exposed to American English. So even though it's the same language, there are a lot of differences between the two. And actually, that's something that we cover on the courses because it always comes up.
So what complicates all of this is facial expression. I don't even think about what I'm doing, but like right now I'm using my hands, I'm tilting my head to emphasize something, and people will think that I'm probably crazy. They don't know anything about what I'm doing, and yet they're trying to learn, trying to listen and formulate what they're supposed to say.
Sure, and you've touched on a really interesting point there, Ed, because of course there's a lot of nonverbal communication that is specific to different cultures. I mean, for example, Italian hand gestures are kind of celebrated the world over because they form a language within themselves. All that stuff. And then in India, sometimes people waggle their heads, but they kind of mean yes, or or something just sort of affirming what you've said, and that can be a bit confusing if you've grown up in a culture where that means no. So there are definitely things we do as English speakers as well. And, I have little sections on this because, these things are quite funny. They're quite culturally specific. And, sometimes English people make very strange facial expressions when they're trying to emphasize a point, or they just do things like speak more loudly in the hope that the foreign language speaker will understand, that sort of thing. So yeah, we talk about this too, of course.
Man, this is a lesson. All right, so let's look at this chart here, this graphic. I'm going to just announce it and then stop talking. English Mastery for Global Professionals, and it, of course, shows your website, which is pronounceme.co.uk. So go check it out. So around this circle here, the sounds gap, we just addressed that. And then going to the right, my right, phonetics, rhythm, and pitch. So rhythm and pitch means, like me, I'm pacing myself. Rhythm means how fast I'm talking, or if my voice is level, or I go higher or lower. because I think I'm supposed to.
Well,
Uh,
these are all aspects of what we cover. To be really specific, linguists consider English to be stress timed as opposed to some languages that are syllable timed. And what that means in practice is we tend to place emphasis on certain important words in a sentence, like nouns and verbs. And, if you want to hear this in a very exaggerated form, listen to the British Parliament, listen to politicians speaking in Parliament, and they will speak very slowly and they will emphasize certain words so that you listen to the content of what they're saying because they want to get a certain point across. So I'm really exaggerating, and you'll hear even more exaggerations if you listen to politicians, but it's very different from languages like Italian or Spanish, where the flow between syllables is much more equally spaced. So Italians are speaking a bit like this, and they're putting more emphasis on each syllable. It's more kind of regular. I mean, there's terrible Italian accent, but can you hear at least the kind of gist of what I'm doing, the difference?
Indeed. And I'm thinking about the last time I was in a pub,
Mm.
and the guys at the bar, they're talking, and it's totally different. And like I could hardly understand anything.
Now, where was this?
In London,
In
um,
London.
uh, in uh, in a pub near St. Paul's, I was in May.
Mm.
And so
And
and I just tapped the guy next to me, who I had no idea who it was, but we're enjoying a beer, next to each other, and watching some football game. And so we struck up a brief conversation. It was very pleasant. And when he looked me in the eye, and he knew that I was American immediately. And I said, well, I'm in Southern California. And he sort of threw up his hands and then started talking very slowly and carefully. It was very pleasant. And we talked about the football team. I think it was Arsenal. Anyway, just my anecdote.
well, a pub is a great example because there's often a lot of background noise. Maybe the TV's on playing the football and there's music playing. And we're kind of listening out for those stress points in the rhythm of the language to have an idea of what the person's talking about, because very often we don't hear every word. And we're just trying to kind of keep up with the gist of what they're saying so that we can at least sort of have a conversation of sorts. And if someone isn't using the rhythm in a way that we're accustomed to hearing it, in that kind of situation, it can make it almost impossible to understand what they're saying. So a pub is a great example of how this can cause difficulty in everyday life.
So let's talk about here on the left side, my left side, secrets of native English speakers
Mm.
and feeling comfortable speaking English. What's the yellow brick road there?
Okay,
How do you walk down that pathway?
sure. Well, this kind of comes on from embodiment. And here we do a bit of research into what ideas people might have about English speakers and how speaking English might feel different to speaking your native language. It might feel different from speaking Italian or speaking Mandarin Chinese. You might have people often have cultural presumptions about native English speakers, maybe that they're very clear in the way that they communicate, or they, or sometimes they're not clear. I mean, sometimes people say that British people use too much underhand humor and irony, and it can be difficult to understand what we mean. Um, but the question that I put to the clients is, what kind of transition are you personally going to have to make to feel more like a native English speaker, to feel that you are communicating everything that you want to say using English as your tool? And sometimes that involves changing our physicality slightly. If you're Italian and you're used to sort of using your hands a lot to communicate, when you're speaking English, that is less available to you because the hand gestures don't really translate when you're speaking English. So then you've got to find something else, and that might be to do with the way that you phrase your words, the way that you use your breathing and your pacing, and even just the intonation patterns, as you can probably hear, I'm coming down a bit on my intonation at the end of each phrase, and that's something that British English speakers in particular typically do, whereas French speakers tend to go up at the end of each sentence, and it's more, they have a completely different pattern. So bringing each phrase down is something that can make us sound more English quite
Well,
quickly.
let's talk about Spanish. I read that, I guess I was on your site earlier today, and a lot of stuff. But in Spanish, there's only a few sounds, right?
Well, if we're talking vowel sounds, yes, they have really pure vowel sounds. So they have 5 vowel sounds. And then they have some sounds that we don't have in English. So for example, ñ is a very, like as in mañana, that's a very specific sound to Spanish. There are some consonants that they use interchangeably, like B and V. So they might say vowel when they mean vowel, for example. They might say, well, we have 5 vowel sounds in Spanish. So we do exercises on that to make sure that they're using the right one, and that they can kind of distinguish one from the other. And then, of course, the R is rolled. There are actually 2 R's in Spanish, and one is very strongly rolled, and we don't really roll the R at all in English. English R is quite flat with the tongue kind of more in the bed of the mouth. So that's another thing that Spanish speakers can work on.
Wow, I had no idea. So is Mexican Spanish different than Spanish Spanish?
Yes, I think so. I don't speak Mexican Spanish. I haven't been to Mexico, but in other parts of Latin America where I've been, there are definitely variants. I mean, for example, in Argentina, they say vos instead of ustedes for the plural second person. So there are definitely differences in variants with Spanish.
Interesting. And is it difference between Argentina, Buenos Aires, and Rio?
Oh yeah, because it's a different language. In Rio, they speak Portuguese.
No, that's right. Yeah. But they're similar, but they're not.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into that. There are all those jokes about Brazilian Portuguese being Spanish after 2 bottles of wine, and definitely in Portuguese the sounds are softer, and
Well,
that's
that's
why
because of the red port. Yeah.
it could be.
Yeah.
It sounds very beautiful when it's sung because those sounds are so soft, like T and D becoming kind of, there's a lot of in Brazilian Portuguese, and that makes it sound very beautiful.
Interesting, isn't it? Okay, now down on the bottom, I can't really see it because of the captions that I've got going on here. But under rhythm and pitch, what is that on the bottom there?
Okay, then we've got present like a pro. And this is really because, certainly with the kind of people I work with, they need to work on their presentation skills. And depending on the field that they're in, there's usually specific vocabulary for their work that can be quite complex in English. In finance, there are very long words that are specific to that industry. Usually, with technical language, there's a lot of consonants, and that can be a real mouthful. Let's say for French speakers, again, a bit like Brazilian Portuguese, consonants are quite soft in French compared to English, where you can hear I'm using these plosive sounds like P and then the T and D, the more dental sounds, and they're quite strong consonants. And languages like French are much softer, so French speakers often have to create more muscularity around those sounds in order to get all those long words out and make them as clear as they need to be.
So let's talk about the difference in language, say between college-educated professional in business in Dublin area versus in the city of London.
Okay, well, having not been to college in Dublin, I'm not sure whether you would be speaking Irish, English, or what. And you might pick up an Irish lilt just from being in Dublin, and of course that's a very beautiful sound. And I have met people who are not native English speakers, and they've picked up a regional accent because they've studied somewhere particular, in the British Isles or in Ireland or somewhere. And that can be very beautiful. I think so long as they're clear, it doesn't matter if they pick up a bit of a regional accent. the important thing is clarity and intelligibility.
So the way you just explained that was quite beautiful to my ear,
Mm.
and I could understand it the way you almost sang it, like a song, music. And it was actually very nice to listen to.
Thank you. Well, this is something I think about a lot, actually, the musicality of different languages. And I really think that each language has its own music. And there's a really great book on this subject called Communicative Musicality, if you're interested in this subject. And I think, that's part of the job of what we do here is finding the music of English for each individual, which, they're still going to keep some aspects of their own, the inflection patterns and so on from their own language, but it's going to move closer to, well, probably British English and be easier for people to understand in an international context. That's really the goal.
So as we come to a close here in the next 5 minutes of this brief short, uh, I very much welcome you back again to be a part of a panel as well as another series in one-on-one with you, because this is fascinating, the different things. And I'm trying to play a role, of course, as the host, moderator, and encourage a conversation that anybody would probably ask rather than a seasoned pro. But as a TV talk show host, and I'm trying to grow my audience around the world, I've become increasingly conscious of my own patterns. And some people would freak out and say, oh my God, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't know how I'm coming across. But by having you explain all these in this kind of succinct detail and how normal it is, I don't have to feel like I'm an imposter or I don't have to feel insufficient. I just have to be conscious about looking at this green light and being camera ready. So as we come to a close with a Hollywood idea of being camera ready for your appearance, so much of business now, because of the COVID, and it's become normalized to have meetings like we're doing here online rather than meeting somewhere and spending $10,000 to make it work and a lot of time and effort. This is really easy and there's no cost practically. But the dynamic usefulness of doing a conversation using this vehicle is so powerful if it's used right. So is a lot of your what volume of your trainings are done now on Zoom or Teams as opposed to at a desk in person?
Much more of it is done online now. I would say the majority is online now. And of course, that means that I can work with people from all around the world without them having to travel, which is great. And also, I run group courses. So you can bring your whole team or people from your own language backgrounds and have a course that's especially designed for that language background. So, the possibilities are much greater for training online, I think.
So to what extent do you think AI, artificial intelligence and all this talk, it can never replace one-on-one, right? Although they have these language schools that are all computerized and
I love this question because, it's such an emerging theme. And what I'm finding at the moment is I am using AI to devise exercises. And the beauty of it is you can create very custom designed exercises. If a client's struggling with particular words or phrases or sounds, you can create AI generated exercises that will give them a lot of training material to work on. And at the same time, I think people do need a lot of personal input with this work because it sounds easy, but it's not easy in practice. Most of the people I work with are high flyers and they're extremely intelligent people. They still really struggle with this because they've got a very entrenched sense of the rhythm of their own language. they've been working using English as a foreign language without this issue of their speech really being addressed. And so, it can be a very tender area where you've got somebody who is a high flyer in pretty much every aspect of their life, having to work on what feels like a kindergarten level skill, and just being able to express themselves and communicate, and having to ask for help in an area where perhaps it hasn't felt safe to ask for help before. They haven't been offered help in their workplace, and the issue has been sort of brushed under the carpet a bit. So just to go back to your question of AI, I think that there is a lot that AI can do in terms of, generating training that is otherwise quite laborious and time consuming to do myself and to write it all myself. And at the same time, I think that the support and accountability that comes from another human being is still very much needed in this area. And it's not something that a computer or robot can completely replicate. I mean, of course we can use a human voice to create support, and I think really great things are happening, but I think people do like to have the human touch as well. So hopefully the two work hand in hand.
EISHA, KAROL, thank you for being my special guest today again on Global TV Talk Show. Using this chart here in front of us and this little blurb about your business will go far. I'll send you the finished program link for your own distribution. And simultaneously, I will show it, exhibit it worldwide starting later today, today, on YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter, and more than 100,000 will receive this program in their inbox in the next couple of days. And then we'll go forward from there. And I wish you all the best with it. And please come back, and someday we'll meet in person. But right now, this is wonderful. And thank you very much for being on Global TV.
Thank you, Ed. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here again.
And it's really educational for me and actually fun, because we have to learn how to be comfortable with this green light, and we have to learn how to speak and to enunciate and to keep in mind that there's a ton of people out there who will see this whose primary language is not English, Hollywood English, or Oxford English. So use us to help yourself learn and grow.
Well, I'm
So
so glad that you mentioned fun, Ed, because this is the whole idea, to make this process fun. And, linguistics can be a very dry subject. Phonetics can just look like a load of scary, weird symbols. But I've really tried to make this program fun. And, people usually do have a lot of fun in the process, especially finding out that words aren't pronounced the way that they thought they were, and having to, learn funny rhymes and all sorts of things. So yeah, there's a lot of playing around to do.
yeah. Okay. So your website is pronounce me, one word, .co.uk. Isha
That's it.
KAROL. Peace. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ed. Have a great day.
Have a nice evening and wear your sunglasses.
Yeah, I'm getting out there now.
Okay. Ciao.